Hi, welcome to the Kingdom Lounge. I'm Bethany,
And I'm JJ.
and today we are going to do a deep dive into something that I think we as women struggle with in particular. And the topic is, am I too much or am I not enough? JJ, what do you think?
Yes. So I would say if you were to ask me the question, am I too much? Or, oh no, if you were to ask me the question, do I feel like I am too much? Or do I feel like I'm not enough? My answer would be yes to both. At different times, different occasions, different reasons. Yes, that is how I feel. I have felt like too much and I have felt like not enough. I continue to feel that.
Yeah.
If I were to make the statement, knowing what I know, am I too much? No. Am I not enough? No. So I think the reality of understanding how I feel compared to what I am and learning to figure out why do I feel like that? So Bethany, you do a breakdown on that question of, and it's the word is trigger, and it's almost like the word trigger is a triggering word for me. Um, because what is your trigger of why do you feel like you are not enough? Why would you feel like you are too much? Because I know as women, we all feel one way or the other. Some of us feel more on the I'm not enough side, or some of us feel more on I feel like I'm just too much. And I
Yeah.
think trying to break it down a little bit and have a discussion today of like why are those feelings there? Why do I feel it? Why does my mind go that way? What is happening to me or around me that's triggering that thought process and causing a reaction from me from that mindset?
Yeah. And I think it's universal in this sense that it doesn't really matter what your personality type is. Or, I mean, JJ and I are both, we have strong personalities. We tend to be the women who kind of walk into a space and lead out. That's just how we're wired. That's part of our gifting and our calling. I know for me, and like in the dating space in particular, I have had situations with men where they feel intimidated by that. And therefore, when I realize they feel intimidated, the message that I'm hearing, the lie that I'm hearing is you're too much to handle. You're too much. Like, I can't handle you or whatever. And so I think there are particular situations and circumstances that feed these lies that we're too much or not enough. What you were referring to is a tool that I was actually taught a couple years ago, and I have begun to use it in my practice as a spiritual director and as a coach. That has been really helpful for me in certain moments. I thought maybe in this space it would be helpful to just kind of talk through that, and maybe as we do that, JJ and I can share a little bit here and there of ways we've used it or triggers that we've experienced. If that sounds okay. Does
Can
that
I
hit, JJ?
can
You
I
have
ask you
any
a
other thoughts?
question?
Sure.
Yeah, you said something which I identify with of in the dating world there were many moments because of the calling on our lives and the platforms literal and figurative that we find ourselves in traveling the nation and being independent and entrepreneurs and different things like that that I have had the feedback too that I am intimidating, especially in the relationship sense. Guys have felt like I am intimidating. So my question to you, because it was a thought as you said it, do you think that in those moments where we feel like we are too much, or the words to us that you are intimidating, it's too much, you are too much for me, almost lends to us feeling like we are not enough?
Mm. Yeah, that's like a thought flipped on its head. In a weird way, it's like two sides of a coin. Because if someone is telling you you're too much for them, then you're not enough of what they need. And what they need may be for you to shrink back, And so that's the default, is when we go into that space of you're too much. I know for me personally, it makes me shrink back. But I think it's like a double
Yeah.
edged sword where that
Yeah.
message of a guy saying you're too much, what he wants me to do is shrink back. And so then I'm not enough
Yeah.
because I'm not, I can't shrink back. I'm not fitting what he needs me or wants me to be. So, and that's not just in dating relationships. I mean, I've had that in other scenarios as well, in leadership and ministry and things like that. And maybe even in friendships sometimes, where you're like, yeah, so interesting. Have you had that experience as well?
Yeah, I think that's I think that's the damage that that mindset can produce, is just feeling like a failure because, and the truth is I'm just not in the right space. So when you said I'm not, if I'm too much for that person because I'm not what they need. Or
Yeah.
in a situation where people can't absorb what I'm pouring out, it's not for them in that moment. But because if you're getting that feedback or feeling like that, it just it's just a breeding ground to start making. I have felt it, like all of a sudden I feel like I'm not doing this right. I'm not good enough. I'm too much, which means I'm not enough, because it's just it's you start to feel like a failure. And yeah, I think it's a little bit of a dangerous place, but I think it is interesting. I mean, it like literally was like a light bulb for me now as you said it, is how has our strengths in in a wrong frame, our strengths of who we are and when we want to boldly be it, become been misinterpreted or a misfit or not in the right place, and all of a sudden it's had the counter effect on me to feeling like I'm not good enough. I can't. Or
Well, it's interesting. So, in regards to this tool, I'll teach us a really simplified version. But the reality is as we've been sharing sort of about the scenario, and I said my default when I hear that message of you're too much is to shrink back. That's me sort of
yeah.
like maybe avoiding. Um, so let me just talk us through this tool. And like I said, I'm not going to do a deep dive into it because I want it to be a thing. For me personally, it's been a really helpful, practical thing, but only when it's simplified. Because when you're triggered emotionally, there's a lot that comes up and there's a lot to mess with you. So the more simplified way we can talk about this is helpful. So the first thing that you do when you're triggered is you say, what is it that triggered me? So maybe it's a conversation you had with someone and they just said something that just pressed your buttons and you found yourself like anxiety, emotion, whatever it is rising to the surface. Okay. So the first thing you do, you're simply going to name what triggered me. The second thing you're
Mm.
going to do just for your own assessment is be like, okay, let's just look at what level. Is this like a one, which would be the lowest, or is this like a five, which is like, I'm raging and I need to whatever. Um, and then you're going to pay attention to what your response is. So this is where for me, like I was saying, like when I hear that message, I shrink back. So there's four F's. There's fight, which is really you move into, oh no, I'm going to take control of this situation. I'm going to fight this. My response in this moment is fight and protection and that kind of thing. There's flight, which is run away, or you just kind of like flee emotionally. Maybe you shut down. I think for me, that shrinking is probably a flight response. The next one is freeze. So we've got fight, flight, freeze is when you just kind of numb out and you're like, actually, you sort of just I mean, we all numb out at some point in our lives when we're overwhelmed. You turn on Netflix, you listen to music, you distract yourself away from the thing that's actually coming up. So that's freezing. And then the last one is really fascinating. It's called fawn, FAWN. And the
Mm.
idea is that it's tied to another person. So, for example, your response in the moment may naturally come out of like how your husband would respond, how your child would respond, how your best friend would respond. Like you've sort of delegated your own instinctual response and emotion to how someone else would do it. It's sort of like, yeah, delegating it to someone else, but you're mirroring how you think they would behave.
Like a
Um,
deflection.
yeah, kind of like deflection. So just to make it simple again, what happened? Kind of what level of trigger is this? And then what's my response? And it's these four F's: fight, which we're familiar with; flight, which we hear a lot as well; freeze, which we also hear; but fawn. Okay, so those four responses.
And I just want to interject here while you're going through it, because I just want us to pull up some examples. So if you're listening, I want you to like think about a moment, like as Bethany's explaining kind of just the steps that you would go through as identifying a trigger and trying to work through it. Sometimes sometimes a trigger could be something like being ghosted. You could be ghosted from um I mean, I use that as a more now relevant term of being ghosted, but it could be ignored or abandoned or rejected or left. So I say the word ghosted, but maybe it's a text message from you've been talking to a guy, and next thing you know, or you've gone on a couple dates and he's ghosted you. Like, has that have happened to any of us women out there ever in the dating world? Yes. Have you ever ghosted anybody? Yeah. Actually, I don't know if I really ghost people because I have too much of like people pleasing. Like, I could never just, I would try and then I'd have to come back and be
Yeah.
like, just want you to know that and have some like long explanation of like, I just had to go work on myself and had to work some things out. Anyways, I'm not really good at
Well, there's a
ghosting
whole
because,
in that space, there's a whole controversy around what ghosting is anyway. But in simple form, you were just talking about someone that just ignores you or doesn't respond or like leaves you hanging, like whatever context. That could be your friend of 20 years who just stopped talking to you, whatever
yeah.
that is. So yeah,
Or
yeah,
you think everything's good and in the background, they're on a whole nother journey of like, I had that with one of my best friends. There was three of us always hanging out, and we were really close. And something happened, and I never, still to this day, it's been like 10 years. Still to this day, I never knew what happened. But the two of them had some kind of conversation about me, something that didn't make them happy, and then just ghosted me. And like that, I knew that I didn't do anything, especially intentionally, but that sat with me. Or maybe it's like you've been applying for jobs and nobody's calling you back on a job. Um, or
it can also be.
if you're a mom and you're asking for help with your kids and you've called everybody and you just need a night out or some time to take a bath and just have somebody babysit your kids or just watch them and you need some help and everybody's too busy all the time for you. Like you can't,
Yeah.
you feel like no one can help you. Like those are all feeling ghosted or abandoned or rejected triggers.
Yeah, and I think and that's just one category. I mean, there are
Yeah.
cultural, political. I won't tell this story, but last year or 2 years ago, something was happening on the global stage that really, really triggered me. And I actually did
Mm.
this exercise to be like, what? Why did I respond so like vehemently with this particular issue that really had nothing to do with me personally? Because it was, I mean, it does, but it was a bigger stage kind of situation. But I use this tool to help me get to the bottom of what it was. And that was more of not somebody personally, but it was like a bigger scenario. It could be the lack of, like, you're kind of talking about a lack of response from someone. It could be not being invited to a party or a gathering that you think you should have been invited to. I mean, how many times does that happen to us as women?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that scenario happens a lot. Or you weren't included in that thing that those women did, or why didn't they invite you? Like stuff like that. So this can
Maybe
be, and this
maybe
is why,
you're single and when your friends are getting married, You want to be happy for them, but it's you struggle because it's triggering something in you. Or vice versa, you're married and your single friends are going on a trip or traveling. And so, I mean, maybe that's, we could pin that down to some jealousy or whatever, but just talking about the situation where, like, as you go on now, and I'll let you finish explaining the steps, but there's emotions that start to follow, or, but what is happening to you that's making you feel something? And let's stop for a moment and dive into that, because it's lending to the idea that we are either too much or not enough, because that's what it comes
Yeah.
down to. I'm feeling one of those two things most likely.
Yeah. So yeah, so to go back into the tool. So again, you're going to name the trigger. You're going to kind of just sort of take an assessment of how big of a trigger is this, as we just kind of gave some examples of that. Then you're going to say, okay, how am I responding naturally? Not how do I want to respond or how do I think is the best way to respond? What is your actual default response here? Are you fighting,
Mm.
forcing to control? Are you flight, pulling back? Are you freezing, just numbing out, distracting yourself with everything? Or are you fawning and sort of responding as someone else would? Um, and then from there, this is probably the most important question of the whole thing, and this goes into kind of this is where things come to light and come to surface, because this then becomes around the inner healing piece and paying attention to what's actually going on inside of you, which is, when have I felt this way before?
Mm.
That question right there sounds really simple, but again, I'll just go back to my big sort of global issue that was happening. When I pulled back and was like, why am I so, because I went to, oh, sorry, before we go into that question, I skipped a really important part, which I kind of just breezed through. After you name what your response is, you're paying attention to what emotions are coming up. So is it anger, which is really all about anger is a protective emotion. Is it you're feeling sadness or fear, which usually goes around you feeling quite vulnerable? So you're just kind of naming the emotions. Jealousy, you mentioned jealousy earlier. Jealousy is a sister to anger because it's a protector. So usually your feelings in this kind of context are either protector or about vulnerability. And so you're just kind of naming. So again, let me go back to the example of me on this sort of global stage situation where I was like angry, and anger for me is not a default emotion I move too quickly. So when I am angry, it is a huge marker for something is really going on here. Um, and then sometimes you can even feel an emotion in your body, like you can feel your heart racing, or you're like feeling really tense, or
Yeah.
a heaviness in your chest. That's a whole other conversation, which I could talk to us about another point. But after you kind of name the emotion, then that's when you go to, when have I felt this before? So going back to the example, as I began to unpack my anger for when I was triggered by this global thing, as I said, where have I felt like this before? All of a sudden, it became very personal. And the issue became about um, an injustice around being misunderstood in my life and what I do. And therefore, it whittled all the way down to, I feel like I'm not enough.
Wow.
And if I went to the global issue that happened, which had nothing to do with me personally, but when I asked, what does it remind me of? When have I felt this way before? All of a sudden, it was really personal. And what I find interesting about this tool is it can be a tool that God can use to bring stuff up in us that we've been running from or not wanting to confront, that we've been pushing down, we've been distracting from, we didn't even know was there. And then he can come in and speak his truth. So here's the last part of the exercise that's so key, is that you take this piece and you say, what is the truth here? Okay, so if a lie emerges, if it's I'm not enough, or maybe the lie is you're too much, and it could be all sorts of other things that come up. Oh, you always do this. You're not smart. You're not kind. You always look out for yourself. You never look out for anyone else. These are all things that can be lies that are spoken over you through these messages. And maybe somebody's not directly saying it, but the reason the trigger is powerful and why we get so triggered is because when a trigger happens, it's not actually about the trigger. It's about the message we begin to tell ourselves or begin to believe. And so, in working in this process of when did I feel this way before, and these things start unearthing, then you just replace all this with the truth and you say, no, this is what's true. This is, I'm like you said at the beginning, sometimes I feel like I'm not enough or I'm too much. But the truth is, that's not true. God created me precisely and accurately to be me. Now, is he going to do some refining, which we've talked about, like the image of the statue of David? He's going to be whittling away. But the truth is, he created you for a reason and for a purpose as you are. And he wants you to be living out of the best of your strength of abiding in him. And so, as we're replacing the lies with the truth of who God says we are, that is the PowerPoint, and that's where the healing of this comes. So that the next time you're triggered in a similar way or pattern, that you already are like a couple steps ahead and you go, oh, okay, hold on. This is not actually about this thing. It's about this message that I've been believing, that I need to continue to remind myself that is not true. That no, I am not too much, and I'm exactly as God created me to be.
I
I'm
am
not too
enough.
much for everyone. I'm just as I'm created to be. So that, like I said, that's kind of a quick
No,
overview.
I love the breakdown of it, and I think it's so important because there's a balance. And this is my perspective and opinion on it, but especially as Christians, a lot of time in the church, especially if you come out of like a word faith movement, or your parents were that way, or your pastors, and you've kind of grown up in the idea of positive confession, which I strongly believe in, and I know that, and that's this what do you call it? This technique or these questions
I
help
just
us
call
get
it a trigger tool. Yeah, I just call it
this
the trigger
tool.
tool.
That's the word. This tool helps us get to that point, but it doesn't disregard the issue. And sometimes I think in churches we've known it, or a religious system, having a positive confession, as great as it is, sometimes we've had such a positive confession and that's been the answer to everything. We've never actually identified what are we positively confessing regarding. So you want to say, I have a headache. And all of a sudden it's like, you can't say that. Like, don't own it. You don't have a headache. It doesn't exist. Speak health over yourself. Stop speaking so negatively. And it's sometimes difficult because it's like, okay, I can immediately do that, but my head really does hurt. Like, my reality and my faith are having a hard time coming together. So then I start positively confessing in faith, or we say, I am enough, I am enough. But if you don't believe it, faith without
Yeah.
works is dead. You can't have a positive confession and say something without believing it and then expect it to work. You have to fully believe it. Then your positive confession all of a sudden has power and something happens.
Yeah.
So when I think about this this tool, it helps us without going the extreme opposite. That's you go see a therapist or a psychiatrist, and all they do is take you way back to your past of when someone hurt you at some point and point out all the things that are wrong with you. And you come out there more unhealthy than helped. It's taking the balance of both to say, yes, we're going to address the situation. I'm going to identify and recognize what's happening, and I'm going to call it out by name. But when I do, I can take the fact or my reality and face it with faith and find a match.
Mm,
So when I have my faith statement now that's directly correlating to my fact of reality of what I'm feeling, when I'm triggered again, I immediately, now I don't have to go through the tool. Now I learn my counterattack to that trigger is I've already identified, and now I'm proclaiming this over myself, or I'm declaring
yeah.
this. And you might not feel it immediately, but at least we're not airy fairy just saying something because it sounds like the right words. And I haven't dealt with what's actually happening. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
getting to the bottom of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the power of this tool, is it is the balance to say. And I think, I think there are probably a lot of word of faith people who grew up in that space. And then there's the opposite space, which is the opposite spectrum of Christianity, where it's like, oh, woe is me, I'm going to pray, but there's not necessarily a lot of faith attached to that. There's not a declarative power in the words. And so I think this tool actually kind of helps with both of those spaces. But it's like, for example, I see this tool as, um, well, it's a tool, but it's like, okay, I'll just give you an example, and I won't go into this story because JJ knows this. But I was hiking yesterday on a mountain in Switzerland with some friends, and I slid down the mountain. I did the splits, my knee went backwards, and now I have a very painful pulled ligament in my knee or something. But here's the reality: my body is in pain because it's telling me that my body needs healing in this spot. It has brought emotions, and it has brought discomfort, and it has brought
So good.
trauma to my body. But the purpose of pain is to point out what needs healing. And this tool is all about that. So that trigger, that moment, that trauma, that whatever that's coming up is kind of going, hey, pay attention to me. We need to focus here. And focusing there looks like speaking God's truth over it, but bringing to light what's there. You can't heal what you don't know. It doesn't need to be healed. You don't pray for healing when you don't know what needs to be healed. And I'm talking about internally and physically. So that's such a good point of like, it marries, hey, this is my reality right now, and it marries it with the faith of what God says to be true and how we can move forward in that regard.
So you made a statement. I have it in my January calendar here. So it was in January. You made a statement to me on one of our calls, and I wrote it down, and I've had to go back to January and visit it often. But you said the thing that triggers you is most likely the places of your greatest authority. Or another way you said it was the thing that you take the quickest offense to is the places of greatest authority. And it was such an eye opener because now all of a sudden I'm not seeing those triggers as weaknesses. I'm starting to see that, wait a second, there's something more in this that I can identify as actually a strength if I could reframe it. If I could deal with this, I can find out that inside of this, what seems like the most difficult thing I'm dealing with or is bringing up negative emotion is actually a power within me or a message or something that that I could turn and I could find out what is God purposed in this.
Mm, so true. It's about the reframing. I'll give you sort of a quick analogy with this knee situation I'm having. Right before I came on this trip, I'm going to be leading a bunch of projects to work with displaced people in Greece and the south of France and up in the UK. And I'm literally living out of a carry on, and I'm traveling to 7 countries. Going to see JJ along the way, God willing. And right before I left, I went and had reflexology, which sometimes I do. That's kind of my self care when I'm at home. And the guy was really, really working my feet bones. Like he was working my feet, and he's working my ankles and stuff. And I remember thinking, God, like, this guy is really spending a lot of time on my feet. And I just felt like God kind of impressed upon me, Bethany, I'm preparing your feet for the journey that I'm about to send you on. So the next day I go to church. It's my last Sunday at church before I'm off on this project for 7 weeks. And a lady at church, she comes over and she says, oh, I know you're leaving. Can I pray for you? And in the middle of her prayer, she says to me, I think the Lord is making your feet light for the journey. I just started laughing because, like, it's literally the impression that I had the night before when the guy was like working on my feet. So yesterday when I fell on the mountain, and I literally can't walk. I mean, I'm hobbling and like barely putting weight on my foot, my legs. I'm also remembering this promise of like, no, God, you've made my feet light for the journey. So though I'm dealing with this pain now, it's for a greater purpose down the road. And it goes back to this, the pain is coming up so that now I can face it, deal with it, bring it into alignment with what God is saying is true, and move ahead. But that, me leading in this project for the next 7 weeks, is one of my places of authority. So isn't it funny that my feet are being prepared and then I go and I basically twist and pull my knee, and yet I know the strength is in the authority that I have to be stepping out into this journey that I'm going to step out into. And so it
Yeah.
all is a matter of how you frame it. And yeah, for me, it's personally been a very powerful tool. I've taught since I've learned it, I've taught a couple people, and I know they've had testimonies of it helping them grow into purpose and maturity, um, in their walk and in what they carry that God's put in them to carry.
I think like another metaphor to this trigger is, in our bodies, I was thinking of it when you're talking about your feet, we have pressure points. So you have a pressure point here, you have a lot of pressure points in your feet or in here or here. And those pressure points, when you learn, especially like reflexology with your feet, that when they hit a certain pressure point in your foot, it has nothing to do with the foot. It has something to do
Yeah,
with maybe your heart or your lungs or your
yeah,
your brain, or they will push a certain point in your foot to heal a headache or to help you
yeah,
breathe better. And so sometimes our triggers, we think they're targeting that area, so we immediately go and focus there. But the message and the signal is that's maybe where the trigger is, but that doesn't mean that's necessarily where the issue lies. So going through the tool and really just taking it to Holy Spirit and say, hey, listen, Holy Spirit, this happened to me and I am reacting to it. Help me understand why. Like, don't let me all of a sudden gravitate to just the issue, because maybe that's not the issue. If I break it down, what's really going on the inside of me? And let's frame our responses healthily. As women, let's start to say, I'm going to stop just taking it for what it is. You are enough and you are not
yeah,
too much. So
yes,
baseline, that's the truth. That's not changing. So now from that platform, let's start to think, when these things are happening to me, what's the beautiful picture out of it? And something my stepmom Michelle actually taught me is that your brain doesn't create new pathways. It just, you can just replace current pathways. So all the pathways that have been established through our growing, learning, development, influence has already been developed. So they say a habit, you can break a habit 7 days or 38 days. There's different techniques and depending what the thing is. But you can change a habit. But what's happening is you don't redirect a pathway. You have to replace a pathway. So if you have a habit of a certain thing, it's created now like a groove in your mind. Just imagine a pathway that's been dug out and dug out because it's something you've done over and over. If you want to change that habit, you have to stop doing what you're doing and replace it with a new habit. If you don't replace it, the default most likely will be you will continue that same pathway. So you have to stop a certain way of thinking and replace it with something else. So like this tool, going through it completely and replacing, that's that fact and faith. You got to find your issue's replacement. And every
yeah,
time this is happening, I'm replacing it. And I'm creating, it becomes a new pathway, but it's not really a new one. I am just replacing it with something else. So now every time this happens to me, this starts to become my reaction. This starts to become my response to this issue. And that's where we find, wow, I came out, I'm more than a conqueror. I overcame it.
yeah. That's so good. That is so good. And that's why a tool like this, it's not a magic pill. There's nothing, doing this kind of work is hard because you actually have to confront the stuff that's coming up. We could all be triggered and go about our day, and we have been, many of us, for years. We all have triggering moments, and
Yeah.
we have a choice. You can either use the trigger to confront the pain or the thing that's coming up, or you can just ignore it. But ignoring it, well, that's a whole other story with what can happen with ignoring it. But my encouragement to all of us is to really be intentional about when these things come up, use it as a place to see that you need growth and healing in that. And it can become a bridge to the thing that you have authority in. And I love what you talked about is using it as like reframing, recreating pathways that are, already there, but you're sort of rebuilding pathways over the old and exchanging it with the new. So hopefully this has been helpful for you guys. Please comment if it has. I will try to, well, at least on our Facebook page, I'll put in there some of the practicals of the tool. And otherwise, you can always comment or message. So
That's
thanks for being
brilliant.
with us, and we'll see you next time.
Okay.